What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
And in each episode, I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the Duchess of Sussex. Don't worry, Your Highness, we'll be kind. The aim was to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make the world work. We discuss everything from what the future has in store for British Steel to who will be made the next Lord Privy Seal, and of course, the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course, the current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we are joined by Adrian Hanrahan, Managing Director of Robinson Brothers Limited. Based in West Bromwich for 150 years, Robinson Brothers competes across the world in fine and speciality chemicals. Family-owned and professionally managed, the company is regarded as a trusted partner by customers and suppliers alike. Adrian has been managing director since 2008 and has taken the company from strength to strength. In that time, often in the face of unpredictable challenges, both politically and economically. We discuss this and more now. Adrian, welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Well, thank you for joining us today. It's been a few months, obviously, since Robinson Brothers has been in the review. I thought it might be a good place to start and the listeners I know would be keen to find out how business has been.
Sure. Our business has been quite challenging, I don't mind saying, but we're coming to year end in December for 2019, and it's looking very positive.
Excellent.
And having completed budgets for 2020, it's flat, but I will accept flat for the 12 months following the elections and then facing into Brexit at the end of January. So, yeah, we're pretty pleased the way things are going.
Absolutely. And I think up and down the country, no matter what sector it is, Adrian, I think there is, and we'll talk about this in a bit more detail in a bit, no doubt, it's been a difficult year for businesses to be able to have any sort of settled plan because of the uncertainty we've seen. Hopefully that might change. But before we, and we shouldn't really dive into politics straight away, I suppose, Adrian, I think also a lot of people might not be aware of the fantastic and varied history that Robinson Brothers has. Foundations in 1869, if that's right.
Correct. We're coming up to the end of our 150th year in business this year. We were founded back in 1869 by three Robinson brothers. And we really have, we've been a tremendous innovative company over the years. We have followed what's happening within almost the Industrial Revolution through to the Chemical Industrial Revolution, through automotive, through fashion. Yeah. So we have followed the fashions and trends, and we have got into chemistries that followed those trends and have kept us where we are today. So, yeah, tremendous history in the company.
It is superb and a very, very varied one at that. And I think, and looking at the business today, obviously it's changed over those years. One of the extraordinary things about the company is that at my last reckoning, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Adrian, around 2/3 of your products go overseas. Now, if that's still correct, Adrian.
Yes, 70% actually of the business is export, yeah. And then of that 70%, about 65% goes into the EU 27.
And when it comes to remaining strong in export markets, and I think it's something that Robinson Brothers obviously does very well, is the importance of investing in research and development, especially when it comes to staying competitive with continental competitors. How is the approach Robinson Brothers takes when it comes to the R&D process?
R&D is very, very important to us. And we've, although we're a small family business, We have modelled our R&D investment to very similar to the pharmaceutical lines. I mean, pharmaceuticals in general, I think they reinvest about 18% of their revenues back into R&D. We are around the 12%, and I think general industry, if my memory serves me correct, is around the 6 to 7%. So a small company, again, that's an innovative approach to being innovative by investing that amount back into research, because our future really is based on research, either new products or new ways of making existing products. So yeah, very, very key to our success.
Absolutely. And with that all in mind, you've had links with universities all over the region, which have presented fantastic opportunities, not only, of course, for their research departments, but for the company as well.
We have been very successful in that area, and one thing that we do pride ourselves on is working with various universities, not just in the UK, although I will say that the UK universities have been fantastic, and some of the collaborative projects we have had together have been extremely successful, because there is so much knowledge in the UK universities, where from a technical point of view and processing point of view, yes, we are experts in our own right, but then when it comes to the academic support, we must go out to the universities for that. And we've engaged with several universities in the UK, where in recent years we've actually developed and patented 2 different products, which is, and that's very unusual for a small company like ourselves to develop from first principles, patent, but all of that would only been available by working through universities.
And not only that, of course, but it maybe helps and ensures that when it comes to recruitment, you will have younger graduates exactly knowing who you are, where you are, and hopefully coming to work for you.
Key critically, you're absolutely spot on in that observation. Every year we also take on 3 sandwich students from the various universities.
That is to say, Adrian would be sort of a penultimate year away from finishing their degree.
Correct. Yes. It's like they come out to finish their degree. They come to us for 12 months industrial experience. Then they go back and either do a PhD or finish off a master's, and then they become available in the marketplace. And I'm really pleased to say that in the last 4 years, we actually have taken back 3 of those students that have completed their degrees back into our operation, and that has been really, really successful.
That really is marvellous news, especially when it comes to your sector, Adrian. It can be a challenge, an absolute challenge when it comes to recruitment, especially younger people. How have you found, and given you do so much work, again, within Europe and further afield, how good are we as a country, as an economy, in terms of getting our young people equipped with the right skills for these kind of jobs?
I think in terms of the chemical industry, graduates trying to get graduates back in there, I think we do a poor job. I think the quality of our graduates is fantastic, absolutely world class. But I think as an industry, what we have failed to do is to encourage them back into the industry. It just doesn't have that same attractiveness as, let's say, pharmaceutical, electronics, IT. They just seem they've got. I guess those sectors do a far better marketing job than we do. So there are some kind of legacy stories with the chemical industry which are unfortunate. Therefore, it is our duty to reinvigorate the appeal for the chemical industry within the graduates in the UK. That's something we really do need to work at.
And hopefully, I think that's something we'll be looking at. I know at the review in the coming year, especially for the sector, because it is so important. And what with us leaving the common market, it'll become more important than ever in terms of making sure we know exactly not only that our students have the right skill sets, but indeed they're coming to work for the right places. Now, speaking of that, let's take a step back a minute, Adrian, and perhaps look at the sector as you put it up a bit more broadly. What are the major challenges you would identify in the medium term facing it as things stand?
biggest challenges for us in the short term would be, and unfortunately, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to bring up Brexit, but they are Brexit related in that it will be the free movement of people, it will be regulatory alignment, and it will be energy. Those three are the big things for Robinson Brothers as a company, but also, and I think I can represent the chemical industry, that they would be the key drivers for the chemical industry in the short to medium term, for sure.
Well, and
there would be our challenges.
Of course, we speak just after the results of a rather momentous general election, Adrian. You, of course, Robinson Brothers, based in the heart of the West Midlands, in West Bromwich. Not a lot of people would have guessed that those two Labour seats, one formerly belonging to Tom Watson, one formerly belonging to Betty Boothroyd, now have returned two Conservative MPs, which has contributed obviously to the very large majority that the Conservative Party has received. With all that in mind, and now knowing that, I mean, never say never, but now probably in this next 12 months we will be leaving the European Union, is the sector, and are the Robinson Brothers ready for it?
There's a lot in that last statement.
We could talk about this for half hour, but take which bit you want first.
No, we could. I mean, who would have guessed? I mean, certainly who would have guessed this area moving over to the Conservatives? Phenomenal result, really, no matter what way you look at it. Are we prepared? We have been preparing right from the day after the referendum. We've been preparing for a no-deal Brexit. And how we've been preparing for that, we've been really engaging with our customers. We've been assuming no deal. Therefore, we're going to be assuming there's going to be, everything's going to slow down at the ports. You're going to get panic buying from our customers. So we're stocking we're stocking at our customers. We've got our currencies lined up. And so we've had two false dawns. Back in March and again in October. At this stage, I want us to continue on now and actually do it, but not at any price. I really do want us to get a deal whereby, particularly regulatory compliance, in the chemical industry, regulatory compliance or regulatory alignment is key critical, as is the free movement of people, as is this whole energy challenge that we've got. I think I'm probably like the rest of the UK, I am definitely Brexit fatigued, but by the same token, I don't want to just give up the fight to say, Brexit at any cost. It's got to be Brexit, it's going to happen, but we really do need to get a deal that works, not just for our company, but for UK PLC.
Without a doubt, and I think you've identified, Adrian, two spot-on points there, is that I think after 3.5 years, no matter whether you voted passionately for Remain, if one can vote passionately, or voted leave, there was a sense of this whole thing had to end somehow. I don't think people could have stood another Christmas and still talking about whether the country should leave the European Union or not. No, I don't think I could bear any more TV commentary or TV programs about it. No, I really do think that we're absolutely, fatigued by the word Brexit. I think we really are. But I do still say we cannot just turn over. We've got to say, yes, it's going to happen, but we need to have a deal that works for the country. And that second key point there, Adrian, is that I think what we've been doing for 3.5 years is essentially been talking about Brexit in the abstract. And what Correct. That has done has absolutely sucked the oxygen from the room, actually talking about education, healthcare, the finer details of the economy. One hopes now that we know it's happening, our government and Parliament and all those new MPs, and indeed I suggest we get writing to your new ones, we certainly will be able to actually talk about which immigration system we'll be having and what's the best one for us. And that, I imagine, will be hopefully a great relief to a lot of people. It would be a great relief to the country. It's like, Brexit has been a huge distraction from the main running of the country. And,
Yes, the country has continued, but there's a lot hasn't been achieved in the last 3 years that the country really needs to achieve. Getting back on the whole industrial strategy that we've signed up to, that needs to be put back on track. You're right. The big subject like the NHS needs to be put back on track and given the attention that it's need. Building, education, schooling, all of that, stuff that really are important for the future of the business, and I would argue probably more important than Brexit for the future of the country. Really, we need to get back and start concentrating on those key critical subjects, sooner rather than later.
Yes, I think that the nation will be relieved when that does happen. Now, Adrian, obviously yourselves at Robinson Brothers, we've already mentioned, has a very large customer base around the world, not just, of course, Europe and Asia and North America as well. Looking to the future here, what is it, and if anything, but I'm sure there must be, what would you say that as we leave the European Union, Adrian, this country can learn from others, whether that is India, anywhere in Europe, America, that we should be doing better?
Well, that's a very, very deep, very, very deep question.
And
I guess if I had the answer for that, I might be number 10 myself today. But you see, I think the country is doing a hell of a lot right at the moment. We can do a hell of a lot right. We're not doing it right at the moment. We're doing a hell of a lot right. But this, you also have, the big challenges, and then you can argue who's doing it right and who's not doing it right. Environmental protection, the Green Deal that's come through from the EU. I think we've got to continue on the path that we were already on for those areas. We can't operate in isolation, so we're going to have to work with the EU, and certainly we're going to have to work with the US, India, China. One could argue that I guess India and China are on catch up because the changes that come about in those countries over the last 20 years have been phenomenal. I do go to India and I do go to China on business because we sell out there. Well, we purchase some raw material, but we sell back into those markets. And the changes I've seen have been phenomenal. But what I do like about some of those countries is that the government does actually support manufacturing in those countries. I know that's a very sensitive subject in the UK, but I think the UK government, I think they should be focusing and helping the manufacturing industry in the UK.
And I think, Adrian, with this, and we'll find out whether this statement is true or not. But with these election results, it very much has altered the shape of the Conservative Party, in that for the first time, in many cases, it is representing areas of industrial districts, and that, in my mind, is bound to change their possible economic outlook, maybe a little less Thatcherite and a little bit more picking and choosing in terms of helping out certain key industries.
Well, I am really looking forward to seeing how this plays out, because you are right. This is a very, very different makeup in the Conservative Party from what we are used to in the past. And so, yes, if you like, from the industrialized areas, having representation now by the Conservatives, where they haven't represented either ever or for quite a long time, will be very, very interesting. And also, I think the Prime Minister has made some significant promises to all those voters who switched sides. And yes, he acknowledged them in his various speeches, and I compliment him for that. But now he really has to come up with the goods and show medium to long term that he meant what he was saying. So I think that's going to be a huge challenge. And it's going to be the dynamics of government and the dynamics of cabinet, I think, are going to be very interesting over the next, I suppose it's the usual 100 days, what's going to happen in the first 100 days, So, yeah, I'm actually looking forward to seeing what happens in that area.
Now, we could talk about this forever. I'm conscious of the time, though, and we should probably just return back to the business. Again, looking forward, I think no one wants to look back at the moment. What are the plans for the next 12 months? Which I know is probably an unfair question, given we don't quite know what the government's plans are for the next 12 months.
Well, I mean, irrespective of what happens with Brexit, I mean, we have had a very good year this year. We've shown about a 12 to 14% growth this year over last year. But for 2020, we're being slightly cautious in that we're saying that we're going to maintain that. So we're going to be flat in top line, and we're going to be flat on bottom line. So it's still a big ask for a company our size. But so what we're saying is that whatever challenges that we're going to see next year with Brexit, because it's definitely going to happen, we're saying that we can accommodate those and maintain our position in the marketplace. That's the minimum we're expecting.
Excellent. Well, Adrian, thank you very much for joining us today. It will be so interesting to find out what the next 12 months happens, especially where you do business, Adrian. Who knows if we have a free trade agreement with India, China, United States, you never know. But for now, Adrian, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Adrian, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Robinson Brothers are continuing to raise standards. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Eric Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags to you and me. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
Situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that. No. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything. But there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something. And it could be by the time this podcast goes out that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on. I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Withdrawal Act will take place. So as we speak, we don't quite know. As perhaps like the government front bench don't know what's going to happen. You compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without wrecking amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing will be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40 odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December, something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it does quite shock them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we're left without a deal. When we have a deal, suddenly, well, no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition who claim to want this to end, and then introduce wrecking amendments that introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home, doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You were, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you president there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? Hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership. Well, I was
used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you'll know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
No, I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay to be members, and it's a way of not beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow chairman, Lord Blunkett, has said, what some might not know, is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Oh, absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner-city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. And I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. And I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I'll join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around. My family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed. But, I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story, most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I had Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder for visitors, and they always used to you see their eyes going up and thinking, I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Bunk was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realised that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road, Cardinal Place, a fantastic new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was your proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It's on the basis of getting people into jobs. It's about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress, since of course you're stepped down being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like they got in the state to repress. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and warbearing. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing, and it's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls, and they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I meant to make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you're also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
That's very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let the listeners know what projects you are working on with that and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country? Well,
I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you reference as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, after 7 years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps. And we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine you were actually very content and happy because former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you look quite unscathed from it.
I came out, he was very nice about it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out one or two of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
But it's important, I think, and I'm conscious of the time, but I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle, those that have been left behind by our economic progress. And it will be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know that's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Buckingham Arms to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.